The former 5th grade teacher accused of having a baby with one of her former students when he was just 13 years old has entered a plea. This is a shocking case of alleged abuse that is hard to believe how she is answering to the charges. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. We unfortunately cover several cases involving teachers who are accused of having sexual relations with students. They are always shocking, but this story in so many ways is on a completely different level. This week, Caron appeared in a South Jersey courtroom to answer to the charges against her and enter a plea. Before I get into that, let me get you caught up on how we got to this point, and there is a lot. Let's start with the teacher at the center of this story, Caron. She was a 5th grade teacher at a public elementary school in Middle Township, New Jersey, which is in the southern part of the Garden State. Now, this story broke in January of this year, and it broke in a very unique and explosive way. The father of the alleged victim, who we'll talk about, went on Facebook, and he posted that Caron's 5-year-old son looked very similar to his son, and frankly himself, as if one of them was the dad. Now, Caron's son was born in 2019 when the father's son was just 13 years old. Caron was 28 years old at the time. I'll get into what police have allegedly found out that is building a case that the now 5-year-old child is in fact the child of the then 13-year-old boy. Here's how Caron allegedly gained access to that young boy. Not only did Caron teach the young alleged victim and his brother, but they actually lived with Caron. According to court documents, the victim's parents told police that they struck up a friendship with Caron and allowed their kids to spend time at their house and eventually to spend the night there. According to court records, quote, it began with 1 or 2 nights a week, and eventually the children stayed with Caron permanently from 2016 to 2020. Before we go any further, obviously the living arrangement raises potentially some red flags, and we don't know specifically what led beyond having a friendship with Caron for these parents to have their kids live with her full time for roughly 4 years. Police spoke with the victim's sister, who also stayed at Caron's house. She said that she and her siblings would stay in a shared room upstairs, but in the morning, her then 11-year-old brother would not be in that room, but he would be in Caron's room. She also said that while the other children showered in a 2nd floor bathroom, the victim would shower in a 1st floor bathroom, and she said that she allegedly saw Caron enter that bathroom and lock the door. According to court documents, Caron sexually abused the victim starting in 2016 when that boy was just 11, and it went on for multiple years. When interviewed by police, the victim said that he believed Caron, his former 5th grade teacher, would have sex with him twice a week, and he continued to be in communication with Caron up until his dad made that Facebook post last year alleging that Caron was the mother of the victim's child. So let's talk about these allegations. Not only do police have the Facebook post made by the victim's dad, they also allegedly have a screenshot that the victim's sister took of a conversation she had with the victim where he, quote, admits he is the father and, quote, requests her not to tell anyone because he does not want Caron to get in trouble. Police also say the victim's mom spoke with her son, and she says he admitted that he was the now 5-year-old girl's dad. Caron was arrested on January 15th, which was less than a month after the Facebook post that accused her of being the mother of a 13-year-old's child. She was charged with aggravated sexual assault, and endangering the welfare of a child. The local school district said that she was put on administrative leave. This is video of one of Caron's previous court appearances since this story became public. This is per WPVI TV. According to court records, the former teacher is out on bond for non-monetary conditions. Her attorney has also pointed out that at this time, there's no DNA evidence that proves that the victim is the father of Caron's child. The alleged father of her child, who is now 20 years old, spoke to the Daily Mail, and the Daily Mail claims that that victim is standing by his former teacher. He claims that he was not groomed by Caron, but said, quote, I started everything. If it was up to me, she wouldn't have been in jail. It's been 6 or 7 years. I'm 19, about to be 20. This week, Caron entered a plea in court. Caron pleaded not guilty to those multiple counts of aggravated sexual assault and endangering the welfare of a child for an alleged relationship with a student. A grand jury indicted Caron last month on those charges, and at the time, the prosecutor on this case released a statement that said, quote, "These allegations are deeply disturbing, particularly given the position of trust the defendant held in relation to the victim. Our office remains committed to protecting the most vulnerable members of our community and will continue to aggressively investigate and prosecute those who violate that trust." Joining me now is former sex crimes prosecutor Dan Shore. Dan, always great to have you on Law and Crime. I feel like we talk about cases like this a lot, but this one, it feels unique. I'm sure there's not a lot that surprises you anymore just after the experience you've had in your career. But when you go back to first hearing about this story, what was your reaction?
Well, first of all, unfortunately, we see a lot of cases where there's a student who's underage and a teacher preys upon them and has a sexual relationship with them. But this is a very young person. This boy was, I believe the allegations are that they've known each other since he was 11, that the defendant had a baby with him when he was 13. So, as much as other cases are horrifying in details, this takes it to another level in terms of the consequences, the seriousness, and also the age makes it extremely disturbing.
It really is. And I'll get to reportedly, because he's now 18 years old, and he's given a few statements about all of this. But I think it's also still unclear some of the circumstances around this victim and his siblings living with Laura Caron long term. But you see in this case where the family trusted Laura Caron because she was the teacher and allowing the kids to go over to the house. I mean, what do you make of that boundary being crossed where this teacher goes from just having that classroom relationship to then things being on a much more personal level?
Yeah, these are some very unusual facts because, as you said, the victim here and their sibling were living with this teacher for some period of time. And that obviously goes beyond the teacher-student relationship that you normally see. So there was a heightened layer of trust that people beyond just this student trusted this teacher to have this alleged victim live with her. And allegedly, that's where the sex abuse started when they were living together. So we see in a lot of these cases involving teachers that they are in a position of trust. Students are told, listen to your teacher, trust your teacher. And unfortunately, some educators have taken advantage of students. We see this not just in schools, but religious figures of all religions. We see softball, basketball coaches of all sorts that have been accused over time. Larry Nassar with gymnasts at Michigan State. So unfortunately, we see a lot of people in a position of trust. Strangers sometimes sexually abuse other people, but the majority of cases I've seen as a prosecutor and an investigator involve not strangers, but people who someone trusts and the family trusts, and they take advantage of that trust.
I think of earlier this week, I mean, just this week, we were talking about Nikki Callahan, who's a teacher in South Carolina, who is accused of having a sexual relationship with someone. She was the theater director. And in that case, and kind of the parallel that I thought of as we've been following this one as well, is you have, in that case, Nikki Callahan in South Carolina reached out to the mom and said, hey, I can start taking him to the rehearsals, allegedly. And then things escalated from there, where there's just that trust that the authority figures, the parents have. I mean, how common is it that you see that boundary crossed? I mean, certainly you have a boundary that is being blown away when it comes to the relationship between a student and a teacher. But then it just seems that some of these alleged predators are able to just get themselves in the inner circle of a family.
Right. And parents often have little bandwidth to take care of every issue. So they often seek assistance from someone, such as a teacher, to assist them. So we talked about that other case where the teacher offered to drive someone to activities back and forth. For a parent, that is a godsend to say, wow, there's a teacher we trust, we like, they're willing to actually take them so we don't have to drive them around as much. So I think a lot of parents are looking for, you want your children to have teachers who inspire them and connect with them and who the students can trust. This is what we look for as parents. And then when someone takes advantage of this, it's horrifying. I think the gender dynamics are also important here also, that If there is an underage female student and a male teacher, probably a lot less likely that they're going to be allowed to live with them, right? That would just be really hard to imagine. But with a younger male and a female teacher, we have this more implicit trust that there's less of a chance of a violation. And I think sometimes in cases like this, people then take advantage of those societal norms that, oh, this is okay. It's a female teacher. It's a younger male. We can trust this person. And we see what happened. And this takes it to another level because a baby was born based on this relationship when this victim was just 13 years old, according to law enforcement.
And again, the victim's now 18, 11 when this all allegedly began. It happened between 2016 and 2022. Now that it's almost a decade later from when this first started, how does the system look at some of these allegations that do go back several years?
Well, they're very serious allegations because of the age of the victim here. A lot of times when law enforcement and the courts look at sentencing, looks at charging decisions, it's based on the age difference between the parties, the age of the victim. Usually there's a heightened sanction if someone's convicted. So if the victim here was, this is started when he was 11, had a baby when he was 13, that's going to be, if there's a conviction, probably a more strict sentence than if the person was older, which is still illegal and really disturbing. But this is another escalation of the seriousness of this, that this victim was so young when this happened.
And one thing I've noticed in the court records is that you have the victim's father who sounded the alarm on this in a Facebook post originally, but it doesn't seem, at least from the records that we have and some of the files that have been put in, that there's a DNA test that's been done for this baby to prove who the mom is and who the dad is. Typically, what's the process of getting that done in investigations like this?
Sure. Well, if there is a criminal case, then you can get a blood order, a warrant. Law enforcement can get to test the blood of the baby and also the mother, and the father can give a sample also. Or instead of blood, it could be a buccal swab where you swab the inside cheeks of someone. And nowadays, it's a really quick test that gets results very quickly. It used to be something that was more involved and more complicated. So I've had these tests done in cases I've worked on. And that's part of the evidence here, because if a lot of it depends on what's the defendant's defense. Are they going to say we didn't have a sexual relationship? Well, then how do you explain if they have a baby in common? So I would expect law enforcement to want to have that testing, although maybe the defendant's going to acknowledge some of the conduct, acknowledge that the baby was with this victim. So those are some of the considerations I would look to if I was prosecuting this case.
And because I think of if a DNA test comes back and the victim's the dad and Laura Caron's the mom, the baby's obviously a certain age now, so you know when the baby was born. If you're and I know you're on the prosecutorial side of this, but I mean, if you're a defense attorney, what is the defense if that's the case?
I think at that time you're looking at mitigating factors. You're trying to minimize how often this happened, how long this happened for, and you're really trying to get the best plea bargain you can for a defendant here. Because if the baby is the biological baby of this defendant and this victim, you're not going to argue it was an immaculate conception. So there's really not much wiggle room about the fact that they did have some kind of sexual relationship. So I think it's more about mitigation and plea bargaining at that point.
The Daily Mail says that it spoke with this victim. He's 18 years old. He hasn't been identified, but he reportedly gave a statement that was along the lines of saying that he was responsible and, he played a role in this, that he wasn't someone who was the victim in this case. Now that he's 18, what, I guess, impact could his statements have, his current position have on what happened if you were prosecuting this case?
And those are very common arguments. I see a lot of cases where the defense in cases like this is blaming the victim. Oh, they initiated this. They suggested having a sexual relationship, things like that. And first of all, if someone's underage, it is not consensual to have sex with them. That is strict liability. It's not a statutory crime in terms of, it doesn't matter what the intent of the victim or the defendant was, just the fact that they merely had a sexual relationship when she was older and he was underage, that makes it illegal. So blaming someone who's that young and saying that they're responsible, I think would really be counterproductive as an argument. It's not going to get sympathy from a jury. I don't think it's certainly not going to get sympathy from a judge who is making a sentence if there's a conviction. So I see that argument a lot, but I've never seen it really be successful.
If the victim were to, if this were to go to trial, which it seems like once a DNA test would be done, if everything's true, to your point, it would be really difficult to
Mhm.
try and, the Immaculate Conception argument. I don't know if a jury
Right.
would buy that, but if this 18-year-old were to get on the stand and then try to be someone saying she's a great person, she did all
Yeah.
these great things for me, how could that impact maybe the sentence that she gets? I mean, what value would his words have, even if, look, he was 13, between 11 and 13 years old, where this allegedly happened. I mean, to your point, like the law seems pretty clear on that being a crime.
I think it's one of many factors. Certainly, every conviction usually leads to what we call a victim impact statement, where the victim can talk about the impact it had on them and they could ask for a harsher sentence, a more lenient sentence. I think that any experienced judge who's making a sentence will understand that in cases like this, it's very common for the victim to feel a strong attachment to this person. This person was a major figure in their lives, had a sexual relationship with them at a young age. So it's understandable why this victim would feel potentially an affinity for this other person and not want that harmed. We see this all the time in sex abuse cases. We see this in intimate partner violence cases where victims feel an affinity and sometimes love for the person who offended against them. So I think the judge would take that into account, but it's really not going to be very persuasive for all those factors, because we don't want someone who is successful at grooming to then take advantage of that benefit of that grooming to then get a lighter sentence.
Laura Caron pled not guilty this week to the charges she's facing. She was indicted by a grand jury last month. So now she's pleaded not guilty after her arraignment. What happens next in this kind of the court proceedings? I know she's due in court next for a hearing on August 20th.
Yeah, sometimes things run on parallel tracks now. You might have some discovery where they get more information. They might be more evidence gathering. At the same time, there's often plea negotiations between the defendant and the prosecution. And then you move slowly, and unfortunately, a lot of these cases move very slowly towards potential trial, both with evidence gathering and sharing, and also with plea negotiations. And the evidence is used to evaluate the strength of one's case. So the defense has to make a determination about whether we think we're in a position to demand a better plea bargain. The prosecution will determine what they want to offer. But for the reasons we talked about, this is probably going to be a strong case unless there's some other explanation that we're not aware of.
What type of punishment could Laura Caron face if she's found guilty of all these charges?
I would imagine, because of the age of the victim and the ongoing nature of the alleged misconduct, that if that's all proven, you're going to have a significant prison sentence at the end of this. This isn't the situation of, someone who's 16 and a 19-year-old has sex with them once, which would be prosecuted and it would be illegal generally, but you're not going to see a long prison sentence from that. Here you have an older person in authority, a teacher. This victim was living with this person. It was ongoing. They had a child. This is all going to be exacerbating factors that I think are going to lead to a longer sentence.
And I see the comments, after we do stories, which, unfortunately we do a lot of stories related, maybe fortunately in some way just bringing attention to the issue, but the fact that this stuff happens, would you say that these cases with, I would say also specifically female teachers, it seems like there's a lot of stories about female teachers that are getting arrested for some of these cases. Would you say that that's happening more than in the past in your career that you've seen?
I don't think it's happening more. I think it's being reported more, which is good that people are learning about it. And it's good that your program and others cover this. But in my experience, this is something that people didn't talk about for most of the last few decades. As long as we've had a media that reported these types of stories, I think that we didn't have, first of all, we didn't have social media where these stories could be reported very easily by people and spread by people. But also, I think society has changed, that for a male to say that they were a victim of sex abuse, especially by a woman, there was a lot of shame and embarrassment and a lot of wink, wink, nod, nod. Oh, I wish my teacher did that to me. I mean, those are the responses that I see sometimes people make. And I think society has evolved now to recognize this as serious sex abuse, and male victims are more empowered and emboldened to step forward and report it in a way that 10, 20 years ago, they would have been more embarrassed to do it. There would have been more shame, and it would have been taken less seriously than it was now. So I think there's more reporting on it. But my sense is that it's not happening more often. It's just people are, for good reasons, talking about it more.
And as far as the school, I think it's pretty clear she'll never teach ever again. But how are schools doing when it comes to trying to, I think especially too, since, in this case, we're talking about a female who's accused of this. How have schools, I guess, how are they doing when it comes to screening teachers and trying to recognize people who could be a threat to students, even if on the surface it doesn't fit the, I think of like the Jerry Sandusky type sexual predator that many people have as the stereotype over the last several decades in their mind.
Right. Well, screening is really important for background checks when someone is hired. But if someone never had a criminal prosecution before, was never sued, never put anything objectionable on social media, never was disciplined at another school, there's not going to be much in the record to do to look at for a background search. I think background searches need to be strong, but the other thing is people need to report suspicious behavior. If they see a student and a teacher and there's boundary blurring behavior, a lot of people don't report it because they don't want to get someone in trouble. They self-doubt whether they're seeing if it's wrong. But you mentioned Sandusky or the case with Larry Nassar. A lot of people knew about that misconduct for years and never reported it. And it led to the people who were conducting the abuse to feel emboldened to do more and more and more. So we don't know what warning signs there were here, but certainly that should be investigated to determine were other people in a position to know that something improper was happening. And if so, did they report it? If they reported it, did it go anywhere? What happened? So these are all questions that schools need to ask. Do we have a climate where people can report and will report misconduct that they see? So hopefully authorities learn about it before it escalates to this point.
Well, Dan, it's always great to have you on Law&Crime. These are really difficult stories, but to your point, very important to talk about and cover. I know that a big part of what you do as well is write about these issues, and you have a book coming out soon. What should people know about that?
Yes, August 12th, I have a novel. It's called Open Bar, and it's about a child sex abuse scandal at a high-profile university. It's based on real cases that I've experienced and investigated, similar to the one that we're talking about today. And people can learn more if they find me on Substack, but it's out August 12th. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to mention that.
No, absolutely. I'm excited to give it a read. Dan Shore, former sex crimes prosecutor. Thanks as always for being on Law&Crime.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Caron is expected in court again on August 20th. That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law&Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.